Time for today's AM Minnesota program. We are going to be talking about soil conservation, different issues pertaining to soil conservation. Have two guests in studio. The old guy, Tom Coffman, who's the district conservationist at the Rice County NRCS. Why are you smirking, Tom?
Because I appreciate that comment.
And also Nikki Schaefer, and Nikki is a soil conservationist with the Rice County NRCS. And Nikki, I don't believe I've met you before, so tell us a little bit about yourself, and our condolences for having to work with that character sitting by your side.
Yeah, Tom's a hard one to work with every day, but we make do. I grew up in Hastings, and I've worked with NRCS now for 5 years, and I've been in this county for 3 years. And
where did you get your interest in working with landowners, farmers on soil conservation issues?
I have a soil science major in college. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin River Falls, and just through different courses I've taken got me interested in natural resources and wanting to pursue a career with landowners that care about their land.
Yeah, very rewarding, isn't it? Maybe when someone calls and they have some issues with soil erosion, whether it's wind or water, and they say, okay, Nikki, how can I fix this? And then you start accessing the different programs and things that they can do, and then you see the end result in the next big rain event. They didn't lose all that soil, and that's what it's all about, isn't it?
It's definitely a rewarding career.
Tom, where did you grew up in this neck of the woods too, I guess?
Actually, I grew up in the Twin Cities area, Burnsville area.
Oh, okay.
Back in the old days when it was kind of a little more rural, and worked for a couple farmers up there. That's how I got interested in the career. So.
And you've been with the Rice County NRCS for most of your career, haven't you?
Yeah, it's going on just about 30 years now. I came in 1986. So.
And where did you go to school?
The U of M, Jerry. Oh. Of course, you know.
You're lucky, Nikki, that I didn't harass you just a little bit about not going to Minnesota.
She's not a gopher, is she?
No, she's not. Well, we have to take a break for the markets here in about 3 minutes, but one of the things I wanted to make sure I got in, Tom, was the new Farm Bill, conservation provisions, sod buster, swamp buster, but then there was another kind of connection to crop insurance, and we had to make sure we're in compliance. And that's kind of a new twist this year, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of has been back and forth. When the Farm Bill first came out in 1985 was sod and swamp buster and conservation compliance. The crop insurance was linked into it, and I think it was in the either was the 90 or 96 Farm Bill they delinked it or undid it, where then crop insurance wasn't subject to those provisions.
So you could get crop insurance subsidized by the USDA, and then you didn't have to be in compliance under the sod and the swamp buster.
As long as you weren't in any other programs. Yeah. And now with the 2014 bill, they relinked crop insurance premiums to sod, swamp, and conservation compliance.
Nikki, I think that's probably an okay idea. If you're going to get part of a subsidy to pay crop insurance, well, maybe then you should be encouraged to make sure that you are taking care of your land too.
Right. And for everybody in our county that's part of the farm program, we do random selections on their tracts each year to make sure they are in compliance for both highly erodible land and wetlands.
So you do spot check?
We do.
I don't see this as a real big deal because virtually everybody already was in compliance anyway, weren't they, Tom? When, I mean, almost everybody's been signed up for the Farm Bill for a long time.
Yeah, I think, probably, I'm not sure what the percent is, but most likely it's close to 90% of the farmers participate in the USDA programs. So there was probably, a couple handfuls out there that were just doing the insurance and not the commodity programs or the cost share programs. So there's just a few people that this new relinking applies to.
I'll bet with low commodity prices, when we were signing up for this new Farm Bill, I'll bet that percentage went up even above probably 90. I've seen even some estimates say 95, 96, 97
That's possible.
Maybe.
Right, very possible.
My guest in the studio today, Tom Coffman, who's the district conservationist with the Rice County NRCS, and Nikki Schaefer, who's a soil conservationist with the Rice County NRCS. Tom, just before the market break, we talked a little bit about sod and swamp buster and the link between the Farm Bill and now also the link between crop insurance, even though the vast majority of farmers were in the Farm Bill and purchasing crop insurance. There were a few that weren't in the Farm Bill but were purchasing crop insurance.
Yeah, that's correct, and even now with the new Farm Bill, they do say if you don't want to participate in the Farm Bill provisions but still have crop insurance, then you could choose to pay the whole premium and not have the government part paid for if you want to, you know, drain wetlands, plow highly erodible land, and not follow a plan, that type of deal.
So who in their right mind would want to do that? Because, you know, if it's a wetland and hasn't been drained already, well, you know what? 2 or 3 or 4 years out of 5, it's probably going to drown out anyway. And who would want to moldboard highly erodible land and have it all washed down to the Gulf of Mexico, and then you'd be giving up the subsidies on your crop insurance? I just can't see many landowners thinking that way.
No, they're just, if what we're basically saying, it's a voluntary program. And, you know, you could choose to participate in USDA programs, and then if you do, there's a few strings attached. And that is take care of the land and protect the wetlands.
Now, you mentioned, Nikki, that I wasn't aware of this, but you actually are going out and spot checking to make sure that the landowners, farmers are compliant?
Yep. So for HEL ground, we're basically going to go out there and make sure they're following their conservation plan. If their land is highly erodible, then they are required to have a conservation plan on file and be following it. And we'll just check to make sure they have enough residue, they're doing their crop rotation as directed, and that they're treating any concentrated areas of erosion. For a standard corn bean rotation, we want to make sure bean stubble is left in the field in the fall, and if they're putting anhydrous ammonia on, that they can use a knife applicator to do so, but to stay away from chisel plows or field cultivators, because that just does too much disturbance.
Boy, putting on anhydrous with chisel plows has gotten awfully popular as I drive around our listening area.
Yeah, it sure has, Jerry, and that's one thing we're trying to work with the producers on is, and part of the reason for the review, and first of all, just to back up a little bit, I think it's the computer system out of Kansas or someplace selects a random list of track numbers. We used to do 40 or 50 in the county a year, and now it's down to about 10 to 20.
So you don't pick who you're going to spot check, the
Nope,
computer
nope.
in Kansas City.
Right, and then basically we go out and look at the highly erodible and measure some residue and see where it's at. And we basically are trying to get people's attention that, you know, this is important. Pay attention to what you're doing on the soybean stubble particularly, and you hire the co-op to put the anhydrous on or whoever. Make sure you specify that on this particular field, if it's HEL, we want it with the knife applicator, not the chisel plow.
And we should explain for folks maybe that aren't involved in agriculture. Chisel plow, you're doing a lot more tillage than knife applicator. It's just one big knife going into the soil every usually 30 inches. So the point is you leave a lot more residue on the soil surface then versus a chisel plow.
Right, and you know, this spring now I've seen some really nice looking soybean fields that have been worked and planted, and they've got a good residue cover on them, and so maybe they used some urea or 28%, or maybe they knifed anhydrous on and did minimal disturbance that way. But then other fields you look at and you can't even see any residue. And so obviously there was a lot more aggressive tillage on that soybean stubble starting last fall and then finishing this spring and then planting corn. And we're just prime again for a really ugly looking field condition. If we get some June rains, even normal rains in June, we're going to have some erosion on that type of ground.
Or you will get some wind erosion too if you start getting some of those big windstorms moving through.
Yep, that's been happening in the western part of the state, I guess, already this year.
It doesn't happen very often that you find someone out of compliance, does it, Nikki? But once in a while it does?
More often than not, I'd say most people are in compliance, but if they are not, then we let them know. We send them a letter, both if they are in compliance and if they're not. And if they're not, then we can issue them a variance, and they'll be put on the list again for the following year to be checked again.
Kind of like probation. You aren't in a lot of trouble this time, but now it lets them know that they're gonna have to start following their conservation plan and do things differently next year, or then it might not get very pretty.
Right.
So it's kinda nice that maybe somebody's been doing something the same way for a lot of years, and he just hasn't changed and he isn't real aware. I bet for the most part, if you find someone that's out of compliance, they wanna do the right thing and then they're gonna change for the most part?
They usually do.
Well, I guess there's a lot at stake, and you know, they could, again, they could choose to stay out of the program if they want to chisel plow their soybean ground in the fall on highly erodible land. That's their option. I mean, we can't make you not, you know, do this or do that. It's the producer's decision that they want the program benefits, and then with those benefits come certain things on highly erodible land. You either accept that and comply, or you just stay out of the program and then farm it how you want.
I remember one of the first years when I was here, Tom, when you were on our AM Minnesota program, and we were talking about all the different programs, and you've gotten a call from someone, he had a lot of water erosion, and he wanted it fixed. What can we do? And so you kind of put together a plan, and then you said it's up to him to adopt all of it, a little bit of it. You'd like to see him adopt as much as possible, but it's his land. And the way you looked at it is, even if we got some of the steps done, well, it's going to be better than it was.
Right, and again, you know, we work under a voluntary cooperation with landowners. We appreciate it when they invite us out to their farms and we get to walk the land with them, or look it over, do some surveying, and that's where our job satisfaction comes from, is working with the land. And so we do appreciate the landowners when they invite us out and say, hey, I got some situations here, what can you guys come up with here? So.
And is there a separate form then, Nikki, that you fill out if you happen to spot check Jerry's farm?
There is a 1026 form that you file over at the Farm Service Agency if you want to bring any new land into production. So then we'll check that land to see if it's highly erodible in the first place. And then if it is highly erodible, then it'll get added to the list of HEL ground in Rice County, and that's how it gets selected to be put on the list.
Looking at my maps way back, I bought 80 acres of land back in '79. And there was about a 5-acre patch in there that had been tiled already. I put more tile in at that time. And if you look at the old maps, it has PC, prior converted, wetland. So I assume I'm off the hook then, right? There's some grandfather thing that's in there?
Well, it would be the prior converted or non-wetland, and that means it was converted to cropland prior to 1985. So you can put drainage tile in that land, but just make sure if it's anywhere adjacent to a wetland that you do come get setback distances in our office.
Yeah, that you don't get a little too close to an existing wetland and all at once now you're out of compliance.
Right.
Yeah, the other thing with the 1026 is that's sometimes it's referred to as a sod swamp form. So Nikki mentioned it's for bringing land in production. It's also if you're going to be doing drainage on your land and you don't have a certified determination, you could check yes. There's questions there they ask, are you improving your drainage? Are you doing new drainage, maintenance? You answer those questions yes or no, and then basically that'll refer it over to our office and we'll look up the wetland determination and either recertify it or do a new one if it's an old one, and get that up to snuff as well.
You mentioned drainage, and that brings to mind a couple of the meetings that I've been at earlier this winter, Governor Dayton's buffer initiative. And I don't think anybody's disputing that buffers are a good thing. You've helped put in buffers, haven't you, Tom, Nikki? And they do what they're designed to do.
Yep. Yeah, you know, I think buffers are a good practice, and they're widely applicable to wetlands, to lakes, to creeks, to drainage ditches, and even in some cases where, you know, you'll hear some argument that, well, my ditch is bermed up, the land is sloping away from the ditch. But you think about it, when you're tilling right to that bank and then you're spraying along that bank, there's some benefit to stay back, and even some drift with your spray if that's getting over the ditch. We've seen some stability, some slope stability problems on certain ditches where if you're turning that 4-wheel drive tractor on that headland or something, and that wheel is within 5-10 feet of the ditch, and you're making a arc, I mean, the ground is vibrating, and that could cause some ditch bank stability issues, you know, farming that close to the ditch. So you know, the one thing I think that came out of that Northfield meeting, which I thought was pretty good, was, you know, we don't know if 50 foot's the number or if it's 6 feet, and I think the governor said that himself. And I think the word out to on the street is put something there, and use your common sense. Put something where you think it's going to best be needed. We don't need to farm right to that very slope, and stay back a little bit anyways.
Well, I didn't know this until this all came out, that the current law is 1 rod. Now, way back in the day, they measured length in rods, which is, I understand, 16.5 feet. And that was the major pushback that I saw at a couple of the meetings that I went to, was, you know, maybe a lot of areas 1 rod is enough. Maybe some areas 50 feet isn't enough. And most of the comments from landowners was it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all, a decree from the legislature, but it should more be local control with the towns and the Nickies in the local county offices working with the landowners determining what's right.
Yeah, that 1 rod, I'll just clarify that a little bit. That is for county ditches, judicial ditches that have had redetermination of benefits since I think it's 77 or 78. So if you've got an old county ditch system that's been in place, you know, for 40, 50 years, and they haven't reassessed benefits, then the state law does not require that to have the 1 rod buffer.
By reassessed benefits, that means determining how many acres of this watershed are coming down to the ditch, and Tom has this many acres, Nick has this many, and Jerry has this many, so the costs are kind of redistributed according to benefits, right? That's what you're saying?
I mean, in some communities, if they did the ditch viewing, as what they call it, back in the 40s or the 50s, maybe they viewed a lot of the watershed as pasture land. Maybe they viewed it as woodland. Maybe now in certain urbanizing areas, a lot of the watershed is housing. And so
and streets.
And streets. They need to redetermine, re-update some of these ditch systems. And then furthermore, if it's not a county ditch or judicial ditch, just a private ditch. In other words, Jerry, you and I and Nikki, we got together back in 1940, way before we were born. Well, you might have been born.
All right. I guess I deserve that. So payback is fair play.
And we basically says, let's put in a ditch. And we all shake our hand, and yep, we hire the contractor. He digs the ditch through our 3 farms. We've got an agreement. Maybe we've got an easement with each other. You're paying so much. That's a private ditch. The state law does not regulate that.
Yeah, and that I have a private ditch through my farm. And years ago when we bought it, I got a hold of all the neighbors, and everybody chipped in. The contractor just kept track of how much time he spent on Jerry's and how much on the others, and we all paid our share of the bill. And I understood that that didn't apply to that, but Governor Dave's proposal, it would bring those in.
Right. I think they're looking at, you know, probably remapping what they would consider as waters that need a buffer. So that would be a big job right there.
And I think that's my sense of what's going to happen with the whole buffer initiative. It was kind of on a fast track, and it looked like it would just sail through. And I've said many times, this is democracy in action. It sounds like a great idea, but now everybody knows about it. We have meetings, everybody has input, and legislation, gee, I didn't think of that. We better try and work on this. And boy, this, you know, we didn't think of. That's how you end up with good public policy, I would argue, when it's done out in the open and everybody has the input.
That's right, that's right. One other thing to mention on the buffers is through the years there's been a lot of different programs out there. We've got some through the Cannon River Watershed Partnership, where sometimes you're able to harvest it. There's some through the Minnesota River, some of the initiatives there. The northern part of Rice County is Minnesota River Watershed, so there's some options in that watershed. We've got the continuous CRP. So if you're looking ahead thinking that, all right, the buffer law is going to come, or if you're thinking, you know, I maybe should stay back a little bit, if you want to check out some of the programs, just go to your local NRCS Saltwater District office.
We put, I told you, Tom, this story many times. Maybe Nikki hasn't heard it, but we have about 3.2 acres on the quarter section that I grew up on. That a lot of water came from up, and when we got a heavy rain, it'd be running down through there, and it just made you sick when you saw that, and then you'd see that little gully that had washed there. Dad worked with the Waseca County NRCS SWCD, now it's part of administered out of Steele. We lost 3.2 acres in there, but there's a beautiful grass waterway. There was cost share, it's nice and sloped, and the spring when I was planting, I just raised up the planter, field cultivator, drove through it, dropped down on the other side. It's not hard to work through. And it was really nice the last couple of years when you saw those heavy rains. You saw all that water running down this waterway, and it wasn't taking my farm with it, or Dad's farm.
That's good, Jerry. You bet. Good to hear that.
But those are the type of programs that are available. And I think a lot of guys are going to take advantage with the whole thing with the buffer initiative, getting it into continuous CRP or something like that. And then maybe we can turn around on it. You know, the headlands don't produce a lot anyway, right, Nikki? Or not like the rest of the field, so why not let Mother Nature have some of it?
Yep.
What's your sense, Tom? Do you think that's what's going to come out of this? Is that there's going to be a lot more local input and you'll have a lot more decision-making power with what buffers end up on the land?
Yeah, and I think it, you know, if what might come out of it too is some type of a compromise where, okay, we got county ditches and judicial ditches, let's get that one rod in place. And maybe if we have to go redetermine benefits or the counties have to do that, they could get that initiated.
And some time to do it.
Yep. And then the protected water map, of course, every county now has a protected water map, and that was done back in the 70s. And the DNR shoreland rules call for a 50-foot back from the edge of the water on protected waters. So they might, you know, maybe as a compromise, try to enforce that law and the county ditch and judicial ditch.
I know, Tom, let's change gears to cover crops. You've been really interested in cover crops. Nikki, have you been working with landowners in cover crops too, or they keep you busy with doing the other things?
Oh, yep, I stay busy with that as well. You know, over the last couple of years, we've definitely had more interest in cover crops in our county. I think with the really wet springs too, with farmers not being able to get in their fields and get things planted, we've had to prevent plant fields. I mean, people are realizing they need to put cover crops on their field to not only keep their, you know, the fertility in the soil, but to keep their soil in place for those rains too.
I have to tell you my personal story. I always grow 40 acres of peas. The last few years I've had a later planting, so it was late enough I wasn't even tempted to try and plant beans back. So the last couple of years I just left it, and then a while later I come out with Roundup and 2,4-D ester and kill any weeds that were there, and that was kind of my cover crop. Well, it was pretty tough a couple of days this last spring when I happened to go out to the farm with those big northwest winds and southwest winds. My farm was blowing. Half of that were peas, the other half wasn't, and nobody else's was. And you could see some of the soil that had drifted then into the drainage ditch at the end of the field. I think I'm going to have to get a little more serious about a cover crop this after the peas are harvested this spring or this summer.
You know, and that's a great spot to use them. Any of the canning crops, even with sweet corn, if you could get some sweet corn off by the 1st of September, great place to put a cover crop on.
Have the prices gotten a little more reasonable now after the huge demand when we had all of the prevented plant acres? I mean, like radishes, or it was like 40-some bucks an acre, and I'm thinking, boy, that's a lot of money for a cover crop.
Yeah, I think it. You know, I'm not sure if the prices have come down too much on each species of cover. It really depends on what type of mix you're gonna go with. I mean, the radish stuff is still in that $3 a pound ballpark. Same with the clovers and all that. But you know, some of the annual rye and the cereal rye, that's fairly economical. So we could tailor a mix to, you know, to meet a certain budget too, if that's how.
And then could you just like spread it with a fertilizer spreader and then disc it in lightly? I don't even have a drill anymore.
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, there's we did some interseeding last year on a couple farms, and they just put it on with the nitrogen. You know, when they were spreading nitrogen on corn, that was V5 to V7. So Certain
Well,
guys
we
are
saw it
talking.
with the helicopter too, we saw it.
Yep.
So
Certain guys are talking about different apparatuses to put, to drop nozzle the seed between the corn rows this June, trying that. So it's not just, I mean, the easy thing is the cover crop after peas or sweet corn or silage. That's kind of the easy thing to do. The more tougher thing or the more experimental stuff going on and the perceived benefits that we're hearing about from covers is if we could get it during the growing season, growing with the crop, and it just adds a lot of biology to the soil. It gets the fungus and the bugs working, and basically you're freeing up a lot more nutrient that's there in the soil that crop can't get unless there's other roots actively growing there and creating an environment where they can feed the plant that you're wanting to harvest.
Nikki, you mentioned you were a soil scientist. That was your degree or major, wasn't it? Or
Soil science.
soil science. Way back, I took a couple of soils classes with you, and we were talking about fertility and a lot of things. We never paid much attention to the actual microbial activity that was going on in the soil. It's kind of the attitude, it is what it is. Well, now with cover crops and these other things, we're starting to find out the microbial activity is important, and maybe there's something we can do to help it along, right?
Yep.
And did they cover that in some of those soil science classes then?
Yep, River Falls had a big variety of different classes. The curriculum I felt was great, and we did touch base on the soil fertility and the biology in the soil. So I had a pretty good background with my education in that.
Excuse me. I used to think that was kind of voodoo science, but we've really found out now that there is something to that. And is a major thing we can do to help with our healthy soil microbial activity is cover crops, or are there some other things that we can do?
Well, just leaving live roots in the soil with cover crops is really what we're going for. And the less disturbance you have, the more microbial activity you're going to have as well.
I can't believe it. We have news coming up. Just wanted to get out. If you have any questions or concerns, that's why you're there, Tom. That's why you're there, right, Nikki?
Right.
Or go to most counties have NRCS that they can work with.
And one last thing, for those interested that want to pursue some soil health tour this summer, we're going to be taking a bus trip up to Bismarck, North Dakota. So contact our office and we can get you set up with that.
Thanks for coming in, Tom.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jerry.
And Nikki, once again, condolences for having to work with Tom.